Okay. So welcome everybody to our reactivated session on rich media video. We call these reactivated because we've delivered the topic before in the first 3 years of the project, and all the resources and recording of that session is still available. A quick note about the reactivated sessions. The idea is that they're more flipped. We often send activities in advance, more rooted in real experience with new additional guest speakers or guest speakers that are recapping on what's changed since last time. There's a note on the right hand side of the screen you're seeing about the little journeys or mini courses that we've created, and in the resource there's a step-by-step guide as to how you can access those. And Lillian usually does an excellent analysis of all the points that people indicate during registration as to what they most want to learn.
Yeah, so this time round, without any surprises, most people are here for best practice, new ideas for video use. They want to hear from the practitioners. They want to find out about the benefits of using video for teaching. A couple of you, or more than a couple of you, said, how do we make learning with video more active, especially now that we're doing more asynchronous video use? People want to find out about efficient video creation workflows. We mentioned that in our last webinar, so people might want to refer to some of our other recordings as well. And then we have some FlipGrid fans who want to find out how Martin and Craig have used it. And the big question around video assessment, video feedback, which our speakers will make mention of. And then, of course, we have inclusive practice with video, which our speaker Ros and Alistair, of course, will be able to make mention of. Some other things that we might not be able to cover for specifics about video copyright, which is in our resource, and you can refer to the previous pages. Models and frameworks we do have. We might not have time to cover that specifically, but feel free to join us in the chat and discussion after our speakers, and we can chat about that. And maybe Ron will be able to show us his interactive video Xerti again at the end of this speaker session.
Indeed. And just to remind you, because what we're doing, I've sent the link in the chat pane. What we're doing is we're kind of doing the reactivated part of Future Teachers. So we're starting at, I mean, you can see now we're on slide 36 of the Xerti resource. So don't forget that there's another 35 slides beforehand. And this is just a quick review of some of the key content that you might be interested in to explore in your own time and look at. So in particular, I think there's value in looking at the mind map, which is back on slide 5. Again, look at it in your own time, but that's a really nice way of you being able to zoom in, zoom out, move around. You can even copy it and edit it yourself to make it your own version of that. And there's lots of information. I put links there to things that you might be really interested in, how other participants in our last session had used video. Our case studies in the last session, Rob Higson and Timothy Smale, looking at the way they use video, very different to what our speakers are talking about this session, but really valuable. We had, as part of our own flipped activity last time, we actually looked at some promo examples. We each took a totally different approach, from really low tech to quite high tech, at making our own introductory videos based on exactly the same content, to look at different ways you can do that. And then we had a short video clip where we discussed what we'd done, what we felt the advantages and disadvantages were. And that was something that I think was really appreciated in the last session. So you may find some value in looking at that. And then, of course, things like accessibility are big for a lot of people, and we've got some specific information there, not least this important concept here of If, as a result of the legislation, you are not able to make all your videos completely accessible to 100% accurate audio transcripts and 100% audio description and where it's required. If you can't do that, you're probably going to be invoking disproportionate burden. But for goodness sake, don't just invoke disproportionate burden and do nothing to improve. So we've made some examples here. We've made some suggestions about what a minimum threshold of more accessible video might look like. And that, in fact, is being supported as a blog post or an article, some guidance coming out from the Disabled Students Commission at the end of this month, which is really focusing on and confirming the same thing. If you're making disproportionate burden claims, don't make it an excuse to do nothing, at least do something. So we've got some suggestions there that we hope will be valuable. There's some great pedagogical information as well that you might look at. And again, earlier in the resource, lots of different ways based on a range of different frameworks. They're in there already. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about them now. And then the other thing I wanted to really point out was Ron put together this brilliant resource on the range of equipment, almost the ecosystem of different tools and different ways of working that you might look at. Fantastically useful if you want to do more than just a sort of 2-minute video in front of your phone. And then last but not least, PowerPoint. I know Lillian is a real PowerPoint for illustration and images and video fan, and I certainly would fall in the same camp. There's some great things that really limited kind of beginners can do quite quickly using the screen capture option. So that's all in there as well. So that's the overview of the self-access resource that you've got access to already. The link is in the chat pane if you wanted to follow that along and look at it later. And I put a couple of things here after this session. We'd really like you to kind of commit to making video more inclusive for more users. It's brilliant for bringing on board lots of people. Commit to knowing about how to edit auto captions for accuracy, and join us in future discussion lists. Think about what you can do with your students and do it. And that's it from me.
So we're going to start with our speakers, but first we want to introduce someone who couldn't join us today, but I thought capturing his practice would be something you would enjoy. It's slightly alternative. I'm sure it's not everyone's cup of tea, but Martin brings conversational style to his pre-recorded videos, and he does this by using his daughter's puppet. So I thought you should have some chance to see this delightful series of videos that his learners get to see. So Martin is an academic who teaches on about instrumentation and orchestration in music, and he's also director of teaching and learning, or chair of board of studies, I can't remember which. But you can view that there, and we have a short discussion as well about his colleagues' plans to implement video essays. And I know people are quite interested in video assignments, so we just make a brief mention there of that. And then next up, we have Sally, who is going to do her own screen sharing. But Sally Quinn from the Psychology Department in the University of York is going to speak to us about using video in assessments.
So over to you, Sally. I've stopped sharing. You should be able to share.
Brilliant. Thank you. Bear with me.
Great.
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things that I do to share feedback with students. There's no puppets involved, unfortunately, and it's fairly low tech, I think, compared to possibly some of the other things that people are going to be sharing today. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how I use videos to share feedback to my dissertation students for the draft elements that they submit for me to mark. So just to give you some background on kind of the setup of how this normally works. The project has 4 sections, but they can submit 3 sections as draft versions for us to comment on and provide feedback, which they then work on and resubmit later on as the final version. So they submit these electronically in 1 week, and then the following week we would meet up with them and give them the feedback. So it would be marked in that week and we'd go through that feedback with them. So it's basically a Word document that has been annotated with comments. Now, the problems I encountered when I first started doing this was in a 30-minute meeting, I would literally just chuck a load of feedback at the students, both written on the Word doc, but also verbally in our meeting. So the problem with this was that students would often forget what we talked about in the meeting, and I'd often get a lot of questions afterwards through emails or asking for another meeting because they couldn't remember what I'd said, or they were confused about what a certain comment or on their draft actually meant. So what I decided to do was to then, rather than just mark these drafts with the annotation or the comments kind of function in Word, was to supplement it with some videos. So what I do now is to mark the draft as I would have done before, you know, just using the comments function on Word. But then I also record 3 different videos for each of those 3 sections to supplement those comments. And that's essentially a record of what I would have said in that face-to-face meeting. Now, importantly, I share these a few days before we actually then get together in a face-to-face meeting so that they can have time to kind of digest that feedback and come along to that meeting, having had that feedback already and having some questions that they might need to ask me. So that's obviously sent to the students a few days before our ordinary face-to-face meeting. So the benefits that I found that have come out from this is that the first thing is about the permanency of the feedback itself. So in the previous kind of situation, they would just have what was commented on the Word doc. But now with this way of doing things, they have that plus a kind of, you know, video recording of me giving them feedback and expanding on each of those comments that I've put in the Word document for the draft. So that's one thing that really helps, that they can keep going back to that even after we've had our meeting, when they're kind of, you know, attending to each of those comments that I've put on there. The other thing is that the benefit of sending it all to them before we have a face-to-face meeting is that it gives them lots of time, and the time to do a few things actually. The first thing is to give them time to digest what I've said and think about and reflect on how they're going to change those, you know, things, or edit different parts of the draft that I've suggested that they edit. It also helps them think about questions that they might have for me. So maybe they didn't completely understand how I wanted them to change something, or maybe, you know, there's a particular section in the results section where they've done their statistics incorrectly, that they need to kind of check with me what they should actually be doing. The next thing is that they need to think about questions that I've raised, so they come along with those answers to the questions. So what it means is then that these face-to-face meetings that I have with them are actually much more productive, because they get to ask the questions that they want to ask. They get to answer the questions that I've asked them in the video without having to think on their feet. And also I then get fewer follow-up emails from them about, you know, wanting to clarify things. Now, there are some limitations to doing this. Now, clearly the preparation of the feedback takes much longer than obviously before, but I think generally on the whole, thinking about the amount of time you spend with them, both before, during and after, it's probably about the same amount of time. The second thing is that if you've got massive numbers, so this the students that I have for my projects, usually about 10 students. But if you're trying to do this on a cohort level, so in our cohorts, we have about 220 to 250 students. Clearly, you can't do that for all of those students. It's just not doable. So I'm quickly going to tell you now about how we use pre-recorded videos to give feedback to students at the cohort level. Now, what we did was we developed a library of how-to videos, and these were recorded by some of our graduate teaching assistants who actually mark much of the work in year 1 and 2 of our undergraduate degree programme. This was funded by some money that we got from our university to kind of pay the GTAs to do this. So we've got this bank of how-to videos that are really short 5-minute videos that cover different elements of academic writing. And within these, they often show students poor, good and excellent examples of different types of writing. So for example, how to critically analyse a paper within an essay. This allows students to kind of gauge where their own writing is and how they can then kind of build to maybe aim towards their level higher up. Now, these are all housed on our Academic Skills VLE site, which is available to them all the time. So they can go into them at any point. They don't just need to have them on their feedback form. But we also, as I say, link to them via the feedback forms. I've just got a quick example to show you of a feedback form. So this feedback form, the first kind of part of it, these are all the things that they're tested on. These are part of the marking criteria. And then at the bottom, you'll see that there's a to improve section. So we give them some, up to 2 or 3 points to improve, and then we give them some suggested videos from those videos that they should go and watch. So the feedback we've got from students then in terms of how useful they find these videos is that they actually find the different examples, so that poor, good and excellent examples, really useful for them because they can kind of see where they are, but also what a good example looks like. And they often, ask us for that, like what an exemplar kind of essay looks like. And we can't always give them that because we reuse some of the essay questions. But just giving them paragraphs of different examples, they find that really useful. They also reported that getting this feedback with somebody actually speaking to them, they find that more engaging than maybe just reading it on a sheet of paper. Some students have seen really big improvements after watching the videos because something has just clicked with them where being able to see it and somebody talking them through it has meant that they've been able to improve in that aspect of their writing. And then lastly, we found that international students, particularly postgraduate international students, have found them really helpful in terms of trying to get into the kind of higher education writing style that we expect in the UK. So those are the 2 things that I do or that we do in the department for video feedback. Hopefully, there we go, I'm well within time, I've still got a minute left. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. I'll stop sharing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So there are some questions for you, Sally, in the chat. So feel free to answer them in the chat and we'll pull all the threads of questions together at the end. And I think next up we have Ros Walker from Stirling.
We do. Are you ready, Ros? Dundee, I think, rather than Stirling, but
no, I am at Stirling.
Stirling. I should have known that, not Lillian.
Right, I'm just going to move across and share sound as well. Screen 1, share.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Is that coming through okay for you?
That is through okay, Ros from Stirling.
I shall just go into a full screen. Oh, has it gone in? Have you got my speaker's notes now?
I have got the speaker's notes as well, yeah.
Okay, hold on, let me just stop that. I'm just trying to put it back onto the right screen.
Or just do the other option for display, the one next, just to the left of the full display.
That one.
That's it. Yeah, the reading view. Unless you've got any clever stuff, that should work.
You see, I'm learning as well today. Thank you very much.
Everybody learns.
Okay, so I'm going to talk today about some research that I did actually whilst I was at Huddersfield University, and it's looking at the importance of captions for disabled students, and several of you mentioned wanting to know more about the inclusivity today. And video is incredibly important, and we've seen that so much in the last year, but in fact even in a research project I did several years ago, 14 to 16-year-olds told me that YouTube was their first port of call as a search engine rather than Google. So that's my introduction. That's what I look like, Ros Walker, University of Stirling. And also just a quick note on the legal side of this, that whilst we're increasingly using video in education, we are governed by the Equality Act. So we need to make these reasonable adjustments so that all students can access the resources that we're using. And this came to a head for me when I started looking at lecture capture at the University of Huddersfield. We did a mini research project together with a final year student looking at lecture capture. And the students were saying that it was useful for so many things, being able to re-watch their videos. But the one thing that came out of all of this, of course, was that the audio side of it was very difficult for deaf students to access. So all these things that students were highlighting as being benefits of lecture capture were not present for our deaf or hard of hearing students. So we went back to base and we thought, well, students who have a hearing impairment, how do they manage when it's a face-to-face lecture? And we found that some were lip reading if they were close enough to the lecturer, some had a BSL interpreter, and others were using hearing aids or taking a classroom position close to the speaker and having a note taker. So we thought, how can we work around these things and compensate for them? And we looked at the cameras that we were using for lecture capture and thought, do our cameras capture the speaker well enough for somebody to lip read from the speaker in playback? Could they zoom in or see that? Can a BSL interpreter be seen well enough on video to capture the signing? And obviously we're watching these daily briefings from government at the moment where we're seeing the BSL interpreters, but they do feature very prominently and very clearly. I love watching them. And also, would captioning provide a viable alternative on the videos that we're capturing for lecture capture? So as we worked through, we found that lip reading was not a viable option. On the recordings, the way the cameras were positioned, it just couldn't be seen. And actually, we realized how hard it is even in a real lecture, depending on the lighting in the classroom. So using the main room camera to capture a BSL interpreter, and we ran some trials on this. Typically in the university, the BSL interpreters tend to sit to the side of the screen at the front. And we found that actually we couldn't capture any of that fine finger detail that people need from the BSL interpreter. So most people were relying on the audio and the slides, and actually the BSL interpreter just couldn't be captured at all. So we decided to run a little trial, and this was actually using an iPad on a stand to capture the BSL interpreter. Now, it's not often people talk about their failures, but I think it's important that we do look at how we attempted to do this, because then you can see some of the difficulties. So we used a tablet, we used the Panopto app to record the BSL interpreter as an additional channel in the main recording that we were doing. They joined a session and became another stream. But unfortunately, we found that we couldn't offload the video from the iPad afterwards in an hour-long lecture, never mind a 2-hour one. And also it had to be set up ready for every lecture. So if a student was absent because of a health condition, who was setting up the camera for them? And with several sessions taking place simultaneously across the university, that often proved problematic. So we decided to focus our time and energy on captions and adding captions. Panopto already had an option to add captions in, and it did have an option to import captions automatically. But I have to admit, at that stage, this was about 3 years ago, what they were importing was absolute rubbish. It didn't bear any relation to what was being said at all. So we focused on getting things captioned by a professional captioner. And to do this, we sent them off on a 48-hour mission to get them captioned. So you send them off to a company, they're automatically captioned, and they just arrive back captioned. And the students can switch them on by using the CC button. The student could also determine where they sat on the screen, whether they were below or on top of the screen, the color of the captions and the size of the captions to adjust them for themselves. And this seemed to be working really well. I'm just going to play a sample of a student talking about this.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say to me about lecture capture or your experience of it?
In the last year or the last few months really, that I've used the lecture capture with the subtitles, it's made a massive difference on my grades. I don't think I would have finished with a 2-1 if I hadn't had them for that module. That was the module that I was struggling on the most. So if I hadn't had those subtitles when I needed them, I don't think I would have got a 2-1. I literally just scraped one, just because in my final year I was struggling so much with my hearing and the lectures. So I think having that like kind of like the lifeline just there to give me a bit of a boost and give me a bit more motivation, knowing that actually I can do it now, because I don't have to worry about asking my peers for information or going back to my tutor. Like, you get told not to go to a tutor at the last minute and ask questions. This I didn't have to. So I didn't have to ask him at the last minute. So that was really good. Just a lot of independence. I like my independence.
So that interview really, really stuck out for me. It was a student that I'd got to know very well over the course of the year. But when we start to look at the costs of this, you can see that single hour long lectures were coming in at well over $100 per lecture. And if you looked at the number of students in the university who required the captions, it became almost a disproportionate burden. But of course, for those students, not being able to hear or to access their lectures afterwards was a burden for them as well. So this left us with quite a dilemma. But when I looked at it, so this is a summary of the research. The student's deaf and has a BSL interpreter, and the high quality capture of the BSL interpreter on video was an option, but not one that we could pursue. But captions were available. The student's deaf and sits near the front. We could also use captions. A student has another disability or does not have English as their first language also finds the captions useful. So we decided to work really hard on the captions. And actually at that point, I moved universities. I moved up to Stirling, where I found they were experiencing the same problem. But we've also, in the last year, launched into the pandemic, where nearly all of our lectures are now recorded as video. So we've all been working so much more on screen. But something dramatic happened for us in the last year, and that was that Panopto upgraded their automated speech recognition, ASR machine. And that meant that a lot of the videos that we were recording, we actually switched on automated captioning across the university. And I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I have been in a session with deaf students, and we've been asking about this level of perfection. And they've said, actually, they would much rather have the captions with the mistakes than not have the captions at all. So obviously, even in this session here, it can be captioned. I was listening to Sally earlier, and it was really good to have the captions on and watch them at the same time as listening. So as a summary, lecture videos are well received by disabled students, in fact, by all students, but probably for the same reasons as the rest of the student population. The BSL capture would be very useful for our students, but it's really hard to capture the BSL interpreter as a separate stream on the videos. Captioning is very useful for a variety of students, but there is a cost implication if you go for the human level transcription. So I think the question that we're left with at the end of this is, can automated captions really fill this gap sufficiently as time goes by? And I'm going to stop there.
And that was excellent.
I think I've just come in on time, haven't I?
Excellent again, two fantastic performances there.
Absolutely fabulous. I think, you know, you've done all the hard work of finding out directly from the hearing impaired students, and the rest of us would struggle to kind of do all that from scratch. So thank you so much, Ros, for doing that for us. It's been really, really helpful. So we look forward to receiving your slides, because I think lots of people will want to go back through and consult them. And next up, we have a little bit of presentation from Staffordshire, and we have Martin Stevenson and Craig. Will you be joining us at all, or just Martin? I think it's just Martin.
And you may be on mute at the moment.
Yeah, we just need Martin to unmute.
It's okay, I've just gone to the second screen and didn't realise. Thanks for that.
That's okay, we can hear you now.
Have you got my screen up? Is that working okay? No?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Yep.
Superb. Okay, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Martin Stevenson. I'm from the Institute of Policing at Staffordshire University. I'm just going to share some of my experiences around using FlipGrid with our students. Really born out of everybody's problems at the moment, which is the COVID-19 crisis. So just a little bit of context. We were founded at Staffordshire University in 2019. We work with 4 police forces from around the Midlands, and we've got 1,500 or so students at the moment engaged in police constable degree apprenticeships and degree holder entry programs. So they're with us for 2 or for 3 or 2 years, depending on what program they're on. Since COVID, since March, we've taken on 35 new intakes. I think they average about 38 or so students. And since March, 1,300 of those or thereabouts have been entirely online. So like everybody else, we've had a little bit of a nightmare in terms of making sure that they, that they get their proper induction with the university, which is done by our learning technologist, Craig, who's about, I think, in the background somewhere, has done a great job in putting together an automated, quite intuitive, techie, if you like, induction. But there was something missing in that early doors, which was really about getting students to know one another and to see who they were joining that course with. So FlipGrid presented an opportunity for that, and hopefully through these next few slides, I can show you how we've used that. Just a thought, really, I'll pop this into the top right-hand corner to try and see this from the student's perspective, especially for these students who are starting a brand new career in policing, and they're also, for many of them, going to university for the first time and not actually going. They're doing it through the internet. So quite a lot of challenges there, really. Touched on this already, but some of the bullet points I haven't really mentioned are those sort of they were coming to us straight away, so they weren't even going to their employers. So we were getting students really brand new, lots of questions, and so it was really important to sort of get involved with them as early as we could. The third bullet point down was really important, because by using FlipGrid, we also have an opportunity to sort of test whether they've taken on board Craig's induction and they're able to use the camera and the mic and be ready to go really on day one. So FlipGrid, part of that induction that Craig Smith created, required them really just to record a short 1-minute introduction to their class of themselves. Really good in terms of an icebreaker for us, with sort of starting off those sort of peer relationships that are so crucial really in an online learning environment. Really good in terms of student relationships with lecturers and starting that off. Lecturers have all done a bio, so students can log on very early and see who their lecturers are, what their interests are, what their background is, whether that's in academia or from policing. It's that tech check I mentioned. And we've also started now, and this is sort of moving a little bit forward, but we're using it from a formative perspective. So at level 5 in year 2, we do video logs using FlipGrid, where students reflect through FlipGrid from a number of sessions that they get on personality types and the softer skills that are linked to policing. So that's really interesting, and we can give feedback through FlipGrid, either through recorded feedback or through a rubric that's built into FlipGrid itself, which is really easy to use. And you can see on the right hand side of this screen, we set grids up for each of the forces. You can see West Midlands and Warwickshire there, second one down, and different grids that we can set up really just to facilitate the topics that lie behind those, which are the individual cohorts for those forces. So those 35 cohorts sit behind these grids. So if I just flick on that, it'll go to West Midlands, and you can see the different cohorts that we've had over time there from West Midlands Police and the responses from the students within that class. Now, the good thing about this is it gives lecturers a really good view of that class before they get to see them actually on the screen. So you can get a feel for what previous experience they've got, what their anxieties are, what football team they, things that them as a teacher really. So you can start to sort of plan your lesson, the way you're going to approach that lesson a little bit better. They're their responses. So their responses are open to their class. They aren't open to anybody else within their force, just their cohort. And you can see the number of views that from this group of 31, the number of views that those get in terms of within the sort of the learning environment now, or from the pupil, so to speak. We record, we put our own video on there of who we are. As I mentioned that before, so you can shake that up a little bit to make it a bit more interesting if you can. Like you see there, I put a breaking news one on for me, so just a short 1 minute clip about who I am, so they get to see who I am as well. Now, what FlipGrid is quite good at doing is providing that sort of high level information around what who's logging on to what. So you can see from this screenshot here, 84,000 plus views. 1 month and 2 weeks of engagement, if you put it all in one timeline. What it's not so good at is looking at the value that adds for students and teachers. So does FlipGrid give that sort of sense of belonging to a learning community and sort of give students more confidence in using the tech? We're not so sure on that yet, so that's another job for me. And it's the same for same for teachers, really, lecturers. So there's some work to be done there in terms of researching the impact of this from a learner's perspective, and that's something that I'm going to be working on over the next few months. But just a bit of social learning theory on there. I'm not going to go through this. You guys will probably all know more about this than I do. That bottom line, this suggests that a student's relationship with peers is an enabler of motivation, an essential element of effective learning environment. And we know that getting off on the right foot and creating those learning communities early on in a physical setting really works. We've got to try and emulate that in where we are now in an online environment, really. So I mentioned that. What's next for me? Well, I'm doing a very short action research project just around this, and I'm going to dip into those 1,300 students we've got, ask them what they think. I'm going to speak to our lecturing team and see the benefits and see whether those benefits are sort of anecdotally communicated to you about how they are able to sort of set up sessions and learn more about their students online before they get them, whether that's actually beneficial. There's a working title there that's a little bit too complicated. It'll change about 5 times before I actually finish that research, but nevertheless, that's where we are with this. So I think I'm going to be well within time here, but just hopefully some questions here that I may sort of give you the answers to, really. But FlipGrid is owned by Microsoft. For those that didn't know, they bought the company out and included it then in their package, which you can access through Office 365 or on your mobile phone through whichever phone or system that you use, whether that's Apple or others. In terms of colleague collaborators on FlipGrid, they're called co-pilots. I didn't mention that either. So you're not alone in this. You can actually add other lecturers to your grids, and they can have the same access as you and do the same things as you in there. And we've mentioned that community of learners that you create. So you create that sort of level of grids, and below that you set topics, which are your cohorts, and you can manage it that way. So it's a little bit complicated when you first think about it, but it makes absolute sense once you've used it for a while, really. So really good system for us. I think there's some real opportunities for getting upstream in terms of creating learning communities, and some really good opportunities for lecturers and teachers to get upstream and understanding the students that are coming towards them in the future. And I think that's really it from me. So I think I'm well in time there.
You've done fantastically. Thank you very much. That's complete news to me about FlipGrid being part of the Microsoft Office suite now.
Yeah, it's free. If you're an educator, then you've got a school or a university email address. I think it's free anyway, but you need to check that out yourself, really. I can't remember. Yeah. It's certainly free. If you've got Office 365 for your institution, it's certainly free.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's been brilliant having 3 speakers that have been absolutely bang on time. It means we've got plenty of time for the discussion, for which I shall hand over to Ron.
Yeah, we've got some good questions in the chat, and I'm not sure Sally, Ross, and obviously Martin, if you've managed to catch most of them, because the chat has scrolled by really, really fast. But if I can kind of go back to questions for Sally around, how long were the videos for the students? And someone did did ask, were the videos like one-to-one at the point when you were talking about video feedback for large cohorts? So do you want to just make mention of the duration of the feedback videos?
Yeah, so the ones that were for my project students, this is where I only had 10 students to do this for, or thereabouts. It depended actually on how much stuff they had to change. So if they had really great sections that didn't have a lot of feedback, then the videos tended to be pretty short. But I think generally I try not to make them any longer than 15 minutes. For the pre-recorded ones that we've done for the cohort, we purposely made sure that they were only around 5 minutes long, because we felt, as you saw in the example feedback form, if we're giving them 3 videos to watch, if each of those are 10 to 15 minutes long, they're probably not going to go and watch them all. So they're really short, snappy videos that they can go and have a look and see how to kind of take the feedback and kind of improve their work. Sorry, what was the second question, Lillian? I couldn't remember what you'd said.
Is Lillian?
Lillian's gone.
And we're so busy.
Oh, I think it was it one-to-one or something like that?
Well, it was yeah. So the question was, how long are the one-to-ones? Which you've answered very clearly there. And almost that's how you come to the decision about which ones are going to be or the context in which you decide, okay, there's enough things come back in our one-to-one kind of feedback that there's something we perhaps ought to pull together for a whole cohort feedback. Does it work like that? No, so
the one-to-ones they're a different year group to the cohort ones, and the way we decided on the cohort ones was actually, as I said, the graduate teaching assistants do a lot of the marking for year 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So I really took the lead from them, and they kind of, said, oh, these are the typical things that we're finding that we're telling people to improve on quite a lot when we're marking. So, and the videos have actually built in number, because we've each year asked the students themselves, is there anything that they would like us to kind of add to the library? So it has, like this last year, we added, I think, another 5 or 6 videos based on what the students wanted. So it is, kind of an ongoing kind of development where it's growing organically from what the students want, but also what the markers are kind of picking up.
Okay, I liked that approach of not just giving people model answers and saying this is a model answer, because so often students have no idea why it's a model answer, and it's much easier to give people things that are not model answers and explain what could have improved than it is to say that's a model answer. And you, of course, will aspire to that. So that was very good.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Sally. And again, if people keep in the chat pane, see if there's any other specific questions that you want to ask there. Ros, is it worth saying a little bit more about the handoff between what a student would be entitled to under the Equality Act and then your public sector body's response, what you can do in terms of that, because you touched on that, but just in case anybody's not familiar about the difference between doing videos for everyone to as accessible a level as you can, and perhaps some students having specific requirements.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we're trying to do under our public body's duty is our VLE has to be accessible, and our VLE is now incorporating lots of videos as part of the teaching within the VLE. So that's why we've switched on the automated recording across the whole university. But one of the things we found was that lecturers were coming back to us and saying, it's taking me hours and hours to edit out these captions. And we did say to them, well, you're not really required to go back and look at your captions and edit every single word in them. Make sure that the words feature in your slides, as somebody's just pointed out here, and make sure that it's as clear as possible. You might want to spell new words out and things. But obviously, if there is a student in your group who has a specific requirement, then they should still be going through the DSA route, And actually there is funding available for us to do some captioning, human level captioning within that. So we don't want any student to have to rely on the captions if their need is such that they need that real human level checked rather than automated captioning. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. The thing that's probably worth me mentioning at this point is that from government digital services, public sector bodies, accessibility regulations perspective, video does not count as being compliant unless it is guaranteed 100% accurate captions plus appropriate audio description where required. Now, very often the audio description need not be a requirement, because basically that just means that anything on the screen that is significant you should be describing in your narrative. So if you're doing your presentation and you say, instead of just saying, well, from the graph you can see the confirmation about what we've been talking about, that's not very helpful. But if you say from the graph you can see that population peaked in these years because of whatever, then you don't need a separate description for the graph because you've covered it in the narration. But the thing about 100% accurate captioning is that may be the compliance benchmark for the public sector bodies and WCAG and all the rest of it, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it's actually extremely difficult to achieve en masse, in bulk, which is why I think a lot of organizations need to think in terms of what's the best we can do, and that's probably going to be using the automated speech recognition, and make it clear in your accessibility statement if you are having to invoke disproportionate burden, and what minimum improvements you're making would be helpful. So you may not achieve 100% compliance under the law, but if you've made a properly evidenced disproportionate burden claim and you're shown to be moving your accessibility forwards, then your risks should be significantly removed or reduced.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. So we've got some additional questions about that. I think we'll have to take offline the kind of mathematical STEM type subjects. All of us are scratching our heads about that and the most efficient way to kind of correct captions. But even if you could, what do you put in there? Because the captioning space only accepts English and not Greek letters, for instance. So it's that balance between having something sensible there and versus something that's supposed to meet the regulations. And I would err on the side of something sensible and something that actually helps the students. So we're going through a user research project where we're going to kind of work with the students to actually record what they want us to produce for them, because I think that will give us the backup, for any regulatory person who isn't in the know about captions for students that are studying technical subjects. And yes, Equatio, Sammy spoke for us in the Inclusive Practice webinar. Equatio is a really, really good tool to help with quickly getting mathematical content. But again, you wouldn't want to put all the English of the equations into the captions. So that's a project that we're working on. And there's also mention here about, there's a lot of surprise that FlipGrid is now owned by Microsoft. So I think it's a very good surprise, because it feels like we can get our IT to more easily accept it, in an age of like GDPR and IT security and stuff like that. And then Zoom, ASR auto captions. So Gizzy has announced, Zoom's announced today, apparently, that the live ASR captions are available on free accounts as well. That's really good news. What I want to know is whether we still have to pay for it as a university in that case. Because we've been paying for it. It's still hit and miss, of course. I mean, the main thing that I'm frustrated about with Zoom auto captions is that it doesn't like ZERTY.
No.
See? It really doesn't know it. And I'd love to be able to feed all our auto captioning software. I don't know why they don't allow us to crowdsource, correct, and to learn. I think YouTube does a better job of using AI for that. And it's surprising what it picks up. It's scary what it picks up. So yes, thanks everyone. You guys have all been very active on the chat, sharing links with us and asking questions. And this is an open mic. So I wonder if anyone else would like to kind of come on the mic and ask a question or contribute something.
We just need to be slightly careful of time because Ron's got to do his, we do want to capture that what one thing are people taking away.
Well, I was going to start speaking once I share my screen. I think you're seeing the open mic screen, aren't you, that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Yes, we are, yeah.
But Lillian was talking, so I didn't want to interrupt. And I think we need to say a big thank you to all of our guest speakers today. Fantastic stuff. And the prompt on the right-hand side of this screen is that if anybody is interested in doing a guest slot on our next session, which is about getting savvy with digital tools and resources. And I know that's kind of, you know, what's that all about? Well, accessibility is obviously a big part of that tool selection now. And we've heard lots of comments about different tools. And if anyone is using kind of different ways to assess the viability of different tools, checklists and things, we'll be looking at that kind of thing. But we're very keen to hear from anyone else that would like to do a guest slot on that next session on the 31st of March. So we'd be keen to hear from you. Was there anything else in that session, Alistair, that we talked about when we were planning it, didn't we? That it would be good to have someone talk about X, and I can't remember what the X was.
I'll go and have a look at the X while you talk about the the next things.
I'll whiz, but this is still the kind of open mic session. So if you've got questions, put them in the text chat. And if they're specific to guest speakers or anyone in the audience, then obviously prefix their name to the question. We have a few last pages in the resource, which you can access in your own time. This first one I'm showing here is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, a guide to how to access all of our mini journeys, mini courses. So I won't go through that, but there's a step-by-step guide as to where you can sign up and access those. There's a page about us, and if anybody is interested in additional support or needs additional support, then our contact details are there. The next steps, as we mentioned, oh, that's out of date. We haven't updated that. So the next one is actually at the end of March and is about getting savvy. We'll update that page. If you're not a member of our mailing list, do sign up for that, because that's where we'll announce the recording and any other resources being available after this session, probably early next week. And then we have an activity that we get you to do to reflect on what one thing you'd do as a result. I'll come back to that. And finally, you've heard the mention, and this will be the test, whether you need to be a ZERTY developer for it to pick up ZERTY. I'm saying it, no, it's picking up 30 rather than ZERTY. So you're right, Lillian. So we use ZERTY, and that's partly because it's free and open source, and it has a high level of accessibility. And you can see through all of our resources and sessions and the previous recordings, the details of some of that. But it means that you can share these resources, you can repurpose them, you can embed them in your own VLE and so on. So we usually end with this what one thing, and we have a text wall embedded here where you can type your what one thing, be as specific as possible, rather than just revisit all the resources. Try and pick out key points that you will look at in detail. And if that doesn't work, you can't post on my screen, so you will need to
I've added it into the chat.
Oh,
yeah.
you've done it already, Lillian. Okay. So you will need to do it there, but if it doesn't work for you for whatever reason, then just put that what one thing in the text chat, and we'll the advantage of having it here is if I switch to the view messages, we can see them and they become part of that resource for everybody to see your own reflections and so on. So you know, it becomes a sustainable and self-access resource if it goes in there rather than the text chat. Although we do share the text chat as part of the recording after the event as well, so either way is okay. So we're on time for a change, Alistair, Lillian.
Never. I'm sure we'll go out of time pretty soon. I'm just answering some. So Phil, thanks for being so active in the chat. That question about Padlet, it seems to come up over and above everything else. Nobody gives FlipGrid a hard time about accessibility, but everyone gives Padlet a hard time about accessibility, or no one gives a hard time to, I don't know, think of any of the other multimedia tools that we bandy about and use. It's very, very interesting. And I think it's partly because the company has been so slow to respond to questions about accessibility. So they've set up their own site that tells you that they're going to do something to make it better, but that's been up for like 12 months now. So I understand people's reticence. However, in the time where we've been using Padlet, if I think about all those lost opportunities for interaction, for students to use color and more expression, to kind of create their portfolios, to connect with each other, that would have been a big gap, because we wouldn't have used something else. We might have used something else, but not to the same interaction level. So I think it's a good word. Alistair uses quite a lot, that opportunity cost. You've got to kind of weigh that up as well. So it's not that we're saying we're using an inaccessible tool because, but we recommend to tutors that they're aware of the limitations, and to therefore make sure that when they're using it, they explain that carefully to their students. They try and get the students to explain what images they're using, and to kind of, you know, teach them about alt text as well, basically. Yeah. Yeah, I guess if I can just answer that one more question about GDPR. When you use Backpack, you get a different thing from the public Padlet. So, you know, you get your own area, as it were, which is a little bit less worrying, shall we say. I did try and mirror some of the concerns using our Backpack version of Padlet, and it wasn't coming out with half as many pings as a public one.
That kind of thing will probably be good to cover in more detail in
in March, in Getting Savvy.
Good, yeah. Come and join us for a...
We've overlapped into it. It's amazing. I think Phil Marston should come back to us and quiz the panel, something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so many lovely tools, right? And this is why the segue into Getting Savvy next month would be very, very useful. So I hope you'll join us, and anyone here who would like to present on things they've tried. And I mean, Ros was lovely, you know, sharing with us things that she's tried that hasn't worked. People need to share these things to save other people a world of pain. Sally's colleague, Alex, you know, we've had that discussion about, you know, you start off on something, and if you don't know someone else has tried it and why they failed, you've got to do it all again just to get to the same point. So it's really, really helpful if something you've tried hasn't worked, to come along and actually share it. So yeah, I think it's really good. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thanks very much, Martin, who is decorating. We wish you well. Thanks very much, Sally, for coming on and sharing, and Ros. It's been invaluable to have you all here. Yes. So yeah, don't feel like you have to stay, but for those, I'm going to stop the recording, by the way.